Okay, welcome to the deep dive. You've sent us a really interesting stack of source material on medical tourism.
Right.
It's sort of where global travel meets healthcare, right?
Exactly. And our job today, sticking strictly to the materials you sent, is really to unpack the basic language, the key ideas in this industry.
Right.
The idea is to give you, the listener, that kind of shortcut knowledge from these sources so you can make sense of information about medical tourism a bit more easily.
Yeah, makes sense of the jargon. And the sources you sent definitely show this field has its own vocabulary. And, the whole idea of traveling for healthcare, it can look quite different depending on the situation. It's not always like huge operations. Sometimes it's even mixed in with a vacation.
It really is its own world with its own terms and ways of working. Getting a grip on those basic definitions from your sources is, I think, the essential first step.
Okay, let's jump right in then.
Yes.
Looking at the material provided, what's the sort of the core definition? What is medical tourism fundamentally, according to these sources?
Well, at its simplest level, your sources define it as basically traveling outside of your immediate community, specifically for healthcare treatment.
Okay, so the travel part is key. Moving away from your local area for medical care.
Right.
Now, one thing that jumps out straight away from the sources
Yeah.
is, wow, there are a lot of other names used for the same thing. It's like it has several aliases.
It really does. And knowing these different terms, as your sources highlight, is super valuable. It's kind of like your decoder ring for this whole area. You'll see things like health tourism, medical travel, treatment abroad, healthcare abroad.
Okay.
Overseas healthcare, medical care abroad, and the sources are pretty clear. These all essentially mean the same thing, traveling for care away from your home base.
Gotcha. So if I read medical travel, I know we're talking about the same basic idea as medical tourism. Any others the sources flagged?
Yeah, global healthcare pops up. Also, health and wellness tourism, though, we should probably circle back to that wellness bit specifically because it's a bit different. And sometimes it's just called a medical trip. Simple as that. All of them, according to your sources, are basically synonyms for traveling for healthcare outside your usual area.
That does clear things up. It's kind of amazing how many ways you can say the same thing. Okay, so we've got the definition and the many, many names. How do the sources start to break down the different kinds of medical tourism? It's not just one single type of trip, is it?
No, not at all. Your sources tend to categorize it based on primarily direction of travel and, distance.
Okay, direction and distance. Tell us about those categories.
All right, so first up, there's inbound medical tourism. Your sources define this as when someone travels into a country that isn't their own to get medical treatment.
Sure.
So if you're looking at, say, statistics for Mexico or Thailand, and you see how many patients they get from other countries, that's inbound medical tourism data you're looking at.
Got it. Patients coming in from abroad. So what's the flip side of that?
That would be outbound medical tourism. Pretty straightforward. It's when a patient travels out of their home country to go somewhere else specifically for medical care.
Right.
So if you're looking at how many people from maybe the US or the UK are going abroad for treatment, that's outbound from the US or UK perspective.
Okay, inbound coming in, outbound going out. Makes sense. But the sources also mentioned a type that doesn't even involve crossing borders.
Exactly. That's domestic medical tourism. Your sources describe this as traveling within your own country, but still outside your immediate local area. Usually that means, going to another state or maybe another province. It's still a significant trip, and it's specifically for healthcare, but it just happens within the borders of your own country.
Right, that makes sense. Like if you live in a rural area and need to go to a big city hospital in your own country for a specialist, that counts as domestic medical tourism.
Okay, so inbound, outbound, domestic. Those are the main categories the sources lay out.
Those seem to be the foundational ones,
Yeah.
based on the travel paths. Okay. Now, the sources also seem to pull out a couple of specific kinds of medical tourism that are apparently really common or growing fast. The first one they really stressed was dental tourism.
Oh, yeah, dental tourism. Your sources definitely flagged that as, extremely popular. And it's defined simply as traveling outside your immediate community, specifically for dental work.
And the sources give a pretty compelling reason why it's so big, right? It boils down to savings.
That's the main driver highlighted in your source material, absolutely. People travel for dental stuff because the savings can be huge. The sources mention figures like 50, 60, 70%.
Wow.
Even up to 80% savings compared to what they'd pay back home.
80%. I mean, that's enormous. And the sources also say people often combine this with holidays.
Right. Because, a lot of dental work doesn't involve major recovery time. So people can get their teeth fixed, save a ton of money, and then pretty much get straight back to their vacation.
So it almost pays for the trip itself sometimes, maybe.
It can effectively lower the overall cost of the vacation, yeah, by bundling it with necessary care. Your sources also talk about who's going where.
Yeah, what are the typical patterns there?
Well, they point out it's often people from, say, developed nations traveling to less developed ones for this. The examples given were things like Australians going to Thailand or Americans heading to countries in Latin America.
Okay, that cost difference is obviously key. And there was something about perception, too, wasn't there, in the source material?
Yes, that's an important point they raise. A lot of people seem to view dentistry as, well, relatively low risk, compared to major surgery. And that lower perceived risk makes people feel perhaps less worried about going abroad for it than they might for something more complex.
Okay, so you've got massive savings, easy to mix with travel, lower perceived risk. Sounds like a perfect storm for popularity based on your sources.
Yeah.
What was the other specific area they highlighted as growing?
That was wellness tourism. Your sources define this one as travel that's connected with improving or maintaining your personal well-being.
Wellness tourism feels very current. The source had called it a hot market.
They did, yeah. They sort of link its growth to this increasing desire people have to actively look after themselves, both physically and maybe spiritually, too. It's less about fixing a specific illness and more about proactive health enhancement. So it's related, but kind of distinct.
Interesting. So moving beyond just fixing problems to actively seeking well-being through travel. Okay, so we've got the definitions, the many names, the different forms. Let's talk about the people involved. Your sources identify two main roles. First, the medical tourism facilitator. What's their deal?
Right, the facilitator. Your sources basically describe them as an individual or maybe a company, an organization that helps coordinate the trip for the patient who's looking for treatment outside their home area.
So they're like the organizers.
Yeah, intermediaries, basically. They help patients figure out the logistics, connect with doctors or hospitals abroad.
And surprise, surprise, just like medical tourism, the sources list a whole bunch of different names for these facilitators, too.
Tourism agent, medical tourism agency, international patient coordinator,
Okay.
healthcare facilitator, medical tourism business. Sometimes it's just shortened to facilitator, agent, or agency.
Right.
Knowing these different labels for the same kind of role is pretty key to understanding who's who in the industry, according to your sources.
They sound like the crucial go-betweens in this whole process.
Yeah.
And the other key person, obviously, is the one actually getting the treatment, the patient. Your sources call them the medical tourist.
Correct. The medical tourist is simply the person, the individual, who travels outside their immediate community to get healthcare treatment. They're the patient in this whole scenario.
And do the sources give other names for the patient as well?
Yep, they do. Sometimes they're called traveling patients or medical travelers. Depending on the context, you might also just see them referred to as clients, consumers, or simply patients.
Right.
All those terms, in the context of your sources, refer to that person making the journey for care.
Okay. So understanding the facilitators, the organizers, and the medical tourists, the patients, and all the different ways they might be described,
Yeah.
that gives you the main players involved, as laid out in the source material.
It definitely paints a clearer picture of the core elements of this industry, yeah, as presented in your sources.
All right, so let's recap what we've kind of unpacked in this deep dive, drawing just from the source materials you shared. We clarified that core definition of medical tourism. We waded through its many different names, giving you that essential vocabulary. We look at the different forms, inbound, outbound, domestic travel, and those really popular specific types like dental and wellness tourism.
Right.
And finally, we identify the key people involved, the facilitators who set things up, and the tourists or patients themselves.
And really, by zeroing in on this foundational language, these core concepts from your sources, the whole point was to give you that clarity, that framework you need to hopefully cut through some of the noise and understand what's being talked about in the global healthcare industry a bit better.
It definitely provides a solid base. And when you think about areas like dental tourism, with those huge potential savings and how easily it seems to blend with a vacation or this rise of wellness travel, it does make you wonder, doesn't it? Well, it raises a question for you, the listener, to sort of mull over. Given how attractive and integrated with travel some of these health trips are becoming, how might that definition of traveling for health keep expanding? Could it blur the lines even more where, opportunity and value become just as important as fixing a specific medical need?
That's a really interesting thought, yeah. A provocative direction to consider, definitely hinted at by some of the trends we see in the sources you provided.